And I'm gonna tell you why 50 is literally is a diabolical genius. And he's
documentary. I think a lot of people thought that he was just joking around. It turns out he's not. So this is actually a real project that's being made under his G-Unit movie. And
the courtroom was already a furnace of tension, but day 5 took that heat and turned it into an inferno. The proceedings were expected to roll on predictably, just another day of measured testimony and legal back and forth. But then the moment happened. The kind of moment that doesn't just alter the course of a trial, but rewrites the narrative entirely. The doors swung open, and in walked 50 Cent, a figure so polarizing, so undeniably commanding that the very atmosphere of the room seemed to shift around him. It wasn't just his arrival that caused the ripple. It was the way he carried it, like a storm rolling in, calculated and deliberate.
They once worked together a long time ago. They're not friends now. They don't like each other. And yeah, 50 has taken every shot, especially when Diddy has been down.
The gallery froze as heads turned in unison, and even the softest movements, pens scratching on notepads, the shuffle of papers, ceased. It was like the room forgot how to breathe. The man who had been stirring the pot for weeks online had now stepped into the flames, not as a spectator, but as a disruptor. He wasn't there to watch the chaos unfold, he was there to fuel it. The timing was no accident. Just hours earlier, whispers of new evidence had begun circulating. Evidence allegedly linked to 50 Cent himself. The prosecution's office had been flooded with rumors of last-minute filings, and while the details were murky, it was clear something significant had been added to the record. And now here he was, in person, as if to underline his role in this unfolding drama. Diddy's legal team was visibly shaken. The confidence they had exuded at the start of the trial, that aura of control and meticulous preparation, seemed to evaporate in real time. Lawyers leaned into frantic whispers, exchanging glances that betrayed their growing unease. The foundations of their strategy, paint Diddy as a misunderstood icon, downplay the allegations as exaggerated tales from disgruntled associates, were beginning to crack. And it wasn't just the defense that felt it. Even the judge, known for her stoic demeanor, took a moment to acknowledge 50 Cent's presence, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second longer than usual. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. This wasn't just another day in court. This was a turning point.
But she was only on the stand for about 30 minutes, and the big takeaway is this story that she tells regarding the email she got from her daughter in December of 2011. This is where Cassie Ventura writes her mother and another person explaining or expressing that Sean Puffy Combs, she said, threatened to put out explicit videos of her. Again, this is around the holiday time, and also saying that he would do something to the person that she was.
The optics couldn't have been worse for Diddy. For years, he had cultivated an image of invincibility, a larger-than-life persona built on charisma and control. But now, seated at the defense table, he looked anything but. His hands, once steady and sure, fidgeted with a pen that seemed to elude his grip. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact with 50 Cent, who had taken a seat near the back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. It was a power play of the highest order, a silent declaration of dominance that needed no words. The gallery buzzed with barely contained whispers. Was this orchestrated? Had 50 been working with the prosecution all along? The timing of his arrival, coupled with the rumors of new evidence, was too precise to be coincidence. And then there was Cassie, the prosecution's star witness, who had already delivered days of harrowing testimony, seemed almost emboldened by 50 Cent's presence. When she returned to the stand that afternoon, there was a noticeable shift in her demeanor. Gone was the hesitance, the occasional falter in her voice. She spoke with a newfound clarity and resolve, as if the weight of her story was no longer hers to carry alone. It wasn't just her words that landed, it was the context they now carried. With 50 Cent sitting just a few rows behind her, his very presence lent her testimony an air of credibility that no amount of cross-examination could undermine.
So this is when the mother is talking to the jurors, talking to the court, and saying that this was the first time the mom says she realized that her daughter had any issues with possible physical abuse. And in this case, her daughter saying that Sean Combs was going to put these explicit videos out.
The prosecution wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. They unveiled a series of text messages and audio recordings that painted a damning picture. One recording in particular sent shockwaves through the room. It was an audio clip allegedly recovered from Cassie's old cloud account, a chilling piece of evidence that had never been made public before. In it, Diddy's voice could be heard, his tone cold and menacing, issuing a veiled threat that left little room for interpretation. The defense objected vehemently, but the judge overruled, allowing the jury to hear it in full. The reaction was immediate. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease. This wasn't just testimony anymore. This was corroboration. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. News outlets scrambled to update their headlines, each trying to outdo the other with breaking updates and exclusive insights. Social media platforms lit up with clips and commentary, dissecting every detail of 50 Cent's entrance and its implications. Analysts speculated on the impact his presence would have on the jury, while insiders leaked rumors of additional witnesses who were now willing to come forward. The ripple effect was undeniable. Within hours, the narrative surrounding the trial had shifted dramatically, and Diddy's once formidable empire seemed to be crumbling under the weight of mounting allegations and public scrutiny.
So her mother said that Sean Combs said that he wanted $20,000 because of money that he spent on Ventura. So the mother and her husband took out a $20,000 home equity loan, transferred that money into a checking account, and then sent it to Combs.
But the most telling sign of the day's impact came from those closest to Diddy, longtime associates and collaborators, many of whom had remained silent or supportive in the face of earlier allegations, began quietly distancing themselves. Social media accounts were scrubbed, public statements retracted, and the once unshakable network of allies began to show cracks. Even within his own legal team, there were whispers of discord, with some reportedly questioning the viability of their defense strategy in light of the day's events. It was a domino effect, and 50 Cent had just tipped the first piece. Back inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The defense team, visibly rattled, struggled to regain their footing. Their cross-examination of Cassie grew increasingly desperate, their questions meandering and often incoherent. At one point, Diddy himself appeared to lose his composure, his frustration boiling over in a whispered exchange with his lead attorney. It was a stark contrast to the man who had once projected unshakable confidence, a reminder that even the most carefully constructed facades can crumble under the right pressure.
Prosecution, I believe, was trying to show that level of control that they talked about at the very beginning of this case. And then to see that her family talks about being intimidated and fearing for Cassie's safety. And that's why they sent the money, they said, because they were really concerned. We also learned that the mother's the one who said, you know what, I want to take pictures of this abuse. Again, the mom said she did not know about that.
And as the day drew to a close, 50 Cent remained an unyielding presence, his silent defiance a stark counterpoint to the unraveling chaos around him. He didn't need to say anything. His very presence spoke volumes. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. And while the courtroom emptied and the cameras followed him into the night, one thing was clear: the story was far from over. It was as if the courtroom itself had become a stage for something far larger than the trial at hand. With every passing moment, the weight of the allegations against Diddy grew heavier, the cracks in his carefully constructed empire spreading like fractures in glass. But what truly kept the room on edge wasn't just the testimony being delivered, it was what it all represented. This wasn't just a trial about one man's alleged misdeeds. It was a spotlight on the rot that had been festering behind the glitz and glamour of an industry that so often thrives on power unchecked.
When it came to the explicit videos, the prosecution asked her, what was your reaction to hearing that your daughter said she was concerned about those explicit videos? When it came to this idea that Cassie was saying, you know, Mom, Sean Combs is threatening to put out explicit videos of me, she said her reaction to that was she was physically sick, and that she said, quote, the tapes through me.
As Cassie's testimony unfolded, the details became more damning, more visceral. She described a world of psychological manipulation so calculated it bordered on systematic. She painted a picture of isolation where every relationship, every move, every moment was controlled to an almost clinical degree. And it wasn't just emotional tactics. There were tangible, traceable actions designed to dismantle any sense of independence. Her accounts of being monitored, of having her communications restricted, weren't abstract claims. They came with evidence. Screenshots of messages instructing staff to track her movements, emails detailing specific restrictions on who she could speak to at events, even photographs of security personnel stationed outside rooms she wasn't allowed to leave without permission. Each new revelation felt like a nail in the coffin, a grim portrait of a life lived under siege.
It is a big part of the case in reference to this notion that she was forced into it. And remember, the criminal enterprise and the racketeering, according to that indictment, is about him using force and threats and arson and all of these things, they said, for his desires. So that's why I think a lot of what we're hearing are these details.
But the real bombshell came when the prosecution introduced a series of recordings from a former employee, someone who had remained anonymous until this very moment. These recordings, allegedly taken during private meetings and phone calls, revealed conversations that were almost too chilling to believe. In one, a voice identified as Diddy's could be heard instructing a staff member to make sure she knows who's in charge. Another recording captured what sounded like an argument between Diddy and Cassie, where phrases like "you owe me" and "don't forget who made you" echoed with a venom that left the room stunned. The defense immediately objected, claiming the recordings were taken out of context, but the damage was done. The jury had heard them, and the weight of those words lingered like a ghost in the air.
Even the judge has made mention of not wanting this to be a case sort of built on gossip, but really making sure that these jurors are hearing the meat and potatoes of what we're here for, and that's the criminal enterprise, racketeering, trafficking, and making sure that we're hearing information that somehow lead to all of those things.
The recordings weren't just damning on their own. They were part of a larger cache of evidence that had reportedly been handed over by a whistleblower from within Diddy's own organization. According to the prosecution, the whistleblower had worked in a managerial role for years, privy to internal conversations and sensitive operations. In a sealed affidavit, they alleged that Diddy's empire operated with a chain of command designed to suppress dissent and enforce loyalty at all costs. The recordings were just the beginning. The prosecution hinted at more emails, financial records, and internal memos that could soon be introduced, painting a broader picture of systematic control. The courtroom buzzed with speculation. Had the whistleblower already testified in secret? Was this just the tip of the iceberg? The jury was also shown a timeline of incidents that tied together seemingly isolated events into a chilling pattern. One entry stood out, a 2017 trip to the Hamptons that Cassie had referenced in her testimony. On the surface, it had been presented as a lavish weekend retreat, full of luxury and exclusivity, but behind the scenes, according to Cassie and corroborating communication, it had been something far different. Emails and text messages showed staff being given last-minute instructions to secure the perimeter and limit access to certain areas of the property. Cassie claimed she had been confined to a guest house for 2 days during that trip, a claim now backed by time-stamped electronic key logs from the estate. It wasn't just her word anymore, it was technology aligning with her testimony, making it harder for the defense to spin a narrative of exaggeration.
Drika, how would you describe Cassie's demeanor when she took the stand today?
When she walked in there, Rachel, she had on a brown dress, form-fitting, visibly pregnant, head held high, and did not make any eye contact.
Outside the courtroom, the fallout was accelerating at a pace no one could have predicted. Major brands that had once clamored to associate themselves with Diddy were now quietly retracting their support. Statements from corporate sponsors, carefully worded to avoid outright condemnation, began to trickle in. Phrases like "reevaluating our partnership" and "committed to upholding values" became the new corporate speak for distancing themselves from the imploding mogul. One particularly damning revelation came from a former business associate who had worked closely with Diddy's media ventures. In an interview leaked to a prominent outlet, this individual described a culture of fear within the organization, where employees were pressured into silence about what they had witnessed. Nobody wanted to speak up, the source revealed. The consequences weren't worth it. He had too much power. And yet, the most significant shift wasn't happening in the boardrooms or the press. It was happening in the public eye. The court of public opinion, already skeptical, was now fully turning against Diddy. Social media platforms became battlegrounds, with hashtags calling for justice trending alongside resurfaced clips of interviews and moments that in hindsight seemed to carry a darker undertone. One particular clip, a casual interview from years ago, began recirculating. In it, Diddy could be seen dismissing a question about his influence on others with a sharp laugh and the words, "I don't control people, I inspire them." The irony was not lost on anyone, but perhaps the most damning blow came from within his own circle. A former bodyguard, someone who had once been part of Diddy's inner sanctum, stepped forward with a statement that sent shockwaves through the trial. Speaking anonymously but with corroborating evidence, the bodyguard detailed incidents that aligned disturbingly well with Cassie's testimony. They described events where guests at private gatherings were pressured into uncomfortable situations where boundaries were blurred and consent was treated as an afterthought. They recounted moments they had dismissed at the time as part of the job, but now saw in a far more sinister light. And while the defense quickly attempted to discredit the source, the narrative had already taken hold.
And again, just to reiterate what is a freak-off, the freak-off essentially was something that Cassie said she learned about through Sean Combs about a year into their relationship. He described it as voyeurism, wanting to watch her have sex with someone else. And she said that she did it because she was 22, 21, she was young, she didn't know any better, and that she wanted to please Sean Combs.
Inside the courtroom, the tension reached a boiling point when the prosecution introduced yet another piece of evidence. An email chain between Diddy and a high-ranking associate discussing plans for a private event. The language was vague, almost coded, but the implications were clear enough to draw audible gasps from the gallery. Phrases like "keep it contained" and "make sure everything's locked down" painted a picture of someone acutely aware of the risks associated with their actions. The defense scrambled to downplay the significance, but the jury's body language told a different story. They were leaning in, taking notes, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. And then there was Cassie, still holding her ground. As the day wore on, she didn't just recount her experiences. She contextualized them, connecting the dots in a way that made it impossible to dismiss her claims as isolated incidents. She spoke about the broader culture of complicity, about how so many people around her had chosen to look the other way. It wasn't just him, she said at one point. It was everyone who let it happen. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a call to action for anyone still holding on to their silence. As court adjourned for the day, the energy in the room was electric. Reporters rushed to file their stories while spectators lingered, unwilling to leave as if afraid they might miss the next revelation. Outside, the crowd had swelled, a mix of supporters, critics, and curious onlookers. And in the midst of it all, 50 Cent remained a constant presence, his silence speaking louder than any statement could. He wasn't just a bystander in this saga, he was an active participant, a catalyst for the unraveling of one of the most powerful figures in the industry.
What I thought was also interesting is she said that after that first freak off, she said she felt dirty. She didn't want to do it. And when she brought up the idea of having a conversation about the freak-offs in an email, which the jurors saw, she said she backpedaled in the email because Combs responded by saying, "I know, you don't want to do it." And she said, "Oh no, well, it's not that." But that was the beginning. That was in
The trial wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a cultural moment, a reckoning that had been building for years. And as the pieces continued to fall into place, one thing became increasingly clear. This wasn't just about Diddy or Cassie or even the music industry. It was about power, accountability, and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. So what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for Diddy or just another chapter in a story that refuses to end quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time.